Sports Diplomacy and Gender Politics in the Tokyo Olympics. Tomoko Tamari, Goldsmiths, University of London. Focusing on sports diplomacy in the context of the 1964 and the 2021 Tokyo Olympics, the paper examines how socio-politically constructed gender discourse promoted soft power, which refers to non-coercive diplomacy as a contrast to hard power, such as force or military. In this context, the paper considers how the performance of women become a precarious form in the gender inequality of male-dominated society. The paper also analyzes how gender discourse and agency are constructed in terms of Butler's notion of performativity. According to the 2020 World Economic Forum's, Japan ranks 121 out of the 153 countries in the Global Gender Gap Index, the largest gender gap amongst advanced economies. Evidence can be found in the resignation of the head of the Tokyo Olympics Organizing Committee, Yoshiro Mori, due to growing criticism for his sexism comment about women. He remarked, "Women talk too much, and the meeting with female board members would take a lot of time." Mori's relentless remarks about women has thrust gender inequality in Japan into public debate. Given this situation, the former female Olympian and Olympic minister, Seiko Hashimoto, was named the president of the committee. The IOC president, Thomas Bach, supported her, saying, "With the appointment of a woman as a president, the Tokyo 2021 organizing committee is sending a very important signal with regard to gender equality." Hashimoto remarked, "The world is watching, and the organizing committee itself has to be moved first on gender equality, diversity, and inclusion, so it will lead to government and societal reform." Hashimoto was concerned with the international reputation of Japan and fully aware of the needs to display tackling gender inequality as a key agenda item. Reina Suzuki Wagner, who was one of the co-founders of Lean in Tokyo, which is an organization to support women in a gender unequal society, remarked that the positive change, male president was replaced by the female one, happened largely because of international pressure. But Japan would go back to gender unequal society again after the Olympics. In this context, the appointment of a female president, Seiko Hashimoto, could be seen as a diplomatic gesture towards the world. She was expected to perform as soft power, which was aimed not only to ease increasing critical view of gender inequality for the local public, but also to repair criticism from outside Japan. Women as a soft power in sports diplomacy can also be found in the history of Japanese Olympics. The Japanese women's volleyball team, as referred to by Western media as Oriental Witches, won a gold medal at the 1964 Tokyo Olympics. Female players and their male coach, Hirofumi Daimatsu, were frequently exposed in TV programs, newspapers, and magazine articles. Under the coach's hard training regime and authoritarianism, the female players retained a strong tie. One of the players, Makie Sakai, the team leader, said, "The coach Daimatsu was everything to us: father, an elder brother, and a boyfriend." His paternalistic relationship fitted the dominant model of masculinity. In the media, it was suggested that women, female players performed as well and were presented as dependent beings subordinated to man, a male coach. Daimatsu's gender ideology was embodied by his players and well received by the Japanese public as a normative gender discourse. Consequently, the narrative around Oriental witches as a soft power reinforced not only the image of Japan as a tough an enchanted Far East country towards the world, but also produced a new image of Japanese women as strong without losing the conventional value of being a woman. It would be useful to compare to some of the noteworthy differences between the 1964 and the 2021 Tokyo Olympics. Firstly, although the both Olympics used women as a form of soft power, two different versions of gender politics can be found. The performance of Oriental witches in the 1964 Olympics reinforced conventional gender discourse. In contrast, the gender discourse against sexism around the 2021 Tokyo Olympics was diplomatically used for avoiding international criticism. Hence, the main goal of gender politics around the 2021 Tokyo Olympics was not to realize real gender equality in Japanese society, rather to provide a temporary shift away from the male-dominant social discourse. Secondly, the message construction process of the 2021 Olympics was radically different from the 1960s due to the new media environment. The popularity of Daimatsu and his philosophy of sportsmanship, as well as the female volleyball players' gender ideology, will largely rely on the old mass media, such as books, magazine articles, and television programs. In the old media platform, his charismatic figure and the image of Oriental witches could be easily edited and controlled in order to create coherent and dramatic message by journalists, TV producers, and Daimatsu himself. The contemporary media environment is symbolized by emergence of internet, social media, and advanced digital communication technologies. Mori's resignation caused by enormous social pressure was a good example of how the public voice via social media created a huge impact on the top senior politician position. Now, we can analyze different gender discourses in both Olympics, drawing on Butler's account of gender performativity. I'd also like to discuss the possibility and the limitation of autonomy via McKnight's idea of performative agency. Butler developed the notion of performativity in order to explain the political and social discursive forces that construct dominant gender identity and normalize it in society. Butler also claims that gender should be considered as a precarious and open-ended category produced by a forced reiteration of performances. Therefore, performative agency can be characterized by its temporality and instability, according to McKnight. It was not surprising that female Olympians publicly performed as conventional Japanese women who internalized the dominant patriarchal value in 1960s Japan. By iterating performance, they become socially acceptable subjects. But at the same time, they were told by paternalistic male coach, he said, forget about being a woman during playing volleyball. Hence, female players had to follow two paradoxical gender ideologies, being a woman and not being a woman. They had to switch over between them temporarily, in public, on court. In this sense, their gender identity can be seen as entailing a more complex immediacy and arbitrariness than identity which is slowly constructed by socially forced reiteration normative regime or by ritualized practices, as Butler holds. As mentioned earlier, Hashimoto's performances were diplomatically planned to present a gender-equal Japanese society to both domestic and international audiences. Her performance as a woman and a president seems to be a temporary political gesture or quasi-performance which reduced her performative agency. This is because her gender identity was institutionally constructed and politically used. As we can see, the reiterated performances are discursively constructed, and the performative agency could be reflected by temporality of various situations. This intrinsic nature of the performativity indeterminacy could bring about subversive conditions. To explain this, the case of Mori's resignation is a good example. Tokyo Reuters reported that a 22-year-old Japanese college student, Momoko Nojo, launched an online campaign to criticize Mori's sexist remarks. She gathered more than 150,000 signatures in less than 2 weeks through Twitter and other social media platforms with hashtag Don't Be Silent. A number of retweeters also posted against gender discrimination. Nojo performed as a feminist activist through social media to connect numerous people who agreed with her subversive reaction against Mori's anti-female discourse. In this process, social media as a platform created an alternative performative agency that acted as a surveillance subject. What is interesting here is that Nojo's anti-sexist performance was reiterated by not only herself, but also a large number of retweeters. In this sense, the social media platform materialized a new collective form of performative agency. This paper has sought to illustrate the gender politics of the Oriental witches in the 1964 Olympics and the female president in the 2021 Olympics, along with the case of 22-year-old feminist activist. These cases have been analyzed using Butler's notion of performativity to better understand gender as a contested form, which is continuously inscribed and re-inscribed by ever-changing political and cultural arbitrary events. This mechanism can reinforce normative gender discourse, but also entail an inherent capacity to change the dominant gender discourse. Given a situation in which increasingly more complex and multiple identities become more common, rather than distinguishing between normative or subversive gender identity, it can be more significant to explore which social political conditions make which particular identity surmount others. Furthermore, the question of how we can undo deeply entangled contemporary political and culturally interconnectivities around female discourse also needs further consideration. Thank you for listening.